Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. In this one, I'm taking a look at Elektra. Elektra was the mid-month character that got a uniform and tier 4 upgrade. I'm not entirely sure why she was selected for that because, spoilers, she wasn't in the Daredevil show, but I'm guessing it's because of her close association with Daredevil the character. So I guess it kind of makes sense there, but what doesn't really make sense is the kind of upgrades that the character got. It seems like the devs were of two minds and kind of split between making the character PvE and PvP. Maybe they tried to make her as a hybrid character, but kind of failed on both ends, or at least didn't really meet the mark in my opinion. Elektra already had a pretty solid base kit for PvP. I believe she's the only character that has two iframe ignore skills, with one of them being a counter skill, and also has the iframe ignore effect, so she can effectively basically have any skill be an iframe ignore for that short duration that that effect is up. She also has super guard break penetration, damage reduction, passive healing, active healing, guaranteed dodge, and a whole bunch of other things that make her pretty solid for PvP, but ultimately didn't really end up doing much in PvP, especially in the meta, because of several factors. One of them being that she has a low HP pool because of her speed typing, for one, and another is that her healing is basically split across multiple skills, so you basically have to rotate through all of those skills to get the same kind of healing that other characters would essentially get in one skill or two. On top of this, her skills were kind of slow and the meta was being dominated by characters that could deal damage quickly, and she would usually open up with her counter skill and just sit there with the opponent being essentially able to one-shot her because she couldn't get the counter skill off. Much of this hasn't really changed. The devs didn't really address any of the key issues that she had in PvP to push her into a higher meta standing, or at least be a little bit more effective across the different PvP game modes. And alternatively, what they did was kind of just give her more PvE access, or the ability to perform a little bit better in PvE, but I don't think anyone was using her in PvE previously, and her current performance doesn't really justify using her in PvE. Either way, I'll show you how she performs in PvE with the latest uniform and the tier 4 upgrade, and what she can do in PvP with these new changes. All of the PvE testing I did was without a damage proc. The first one I went into was a stage 29 of Null without using a leadership or support, and testing out the old uniform just to get a baseline. I was able to complete the fight with roughly around a minute remaining. With the new uniform and exactly the same setup, I was able to complete the fight a little over 30 seconds faster. I wouldn't really recommend building Elektra for PvE because there are better options, and she still does perform better in PvP in my opinion. But if you do want to build her for that, then you can go with a CTP of Rage to make everything easy, but I think that you can make Elektra function with a single skill damage proc, like an energy or destruction. It's just a little bit tricky when you have her ultimate, since you do have to delay cancel that a little bit, and have to delay cancel kind of another skill as well, so it might be a little bit tricky with ultimate, but with the regular rotation, you definitely can make it work. Speaking of the rotation, the one that I went with is to do a 3 delay cancel after you see her kind of do the animation of throwing something up in the air. Then you can immediately go into a 4 cancel 5. It's pretty easy and straightforward. Then you just cancel the first and second skill to fill up the ultimate faster, or if you really want, you can try and time the counter skill on the second skill depending on what the boss is doing, but usually you don't really need to stay in that skill unless your other ones are on cooldown. When you have access to your ultimate skill, you open up with that skill and delay cancel. You basically want to delay cancel the skill at the point where she kind of kneels down into the ground and you see kind of an aura, or kind of like a black aura, appear around her. That's when you can delay cancel, and then you go into the same rotation as before, 3 delay cancel, 4 cancel 5. If or when you get your tier 4 skill, you want to use it right before you go into your rotation, because not only do you want to charge it up faster, but you also have guaranteed crit across all of those skills for the duration that the buff is up on the tier 4 skill. As expected, with the level 80 upgrade, I was able to complete the exact same stage about a minute and 50 seconds faster, or close to 2 minutes. To better gauge the tier 4 upgrade later, I took her into the highest stage of Null that I could, which was stage 99. Thankfully, she fulfilled the requirements for that, but I did end up using a leadership and support, or 2 supports and one of them having the leadership in order to basically be able to complete the stage, which I did with just 2 seconds remaining. So she obviously isn't the absolute worst in PvE, but isn't really anything special. For Elektra, I don't really think her tier 4 is anything too special because I consider her more of a PvP character. Her tier 4 skill is good for PvE because it essentially lets her do damage, which is the highest kind of modifier, because it guarantees that all of her skills are crits, which means that all of her skills will do crit damage, or that extra crit damage that you get from her artifact and from the overcap that she gets with the tier 4 skill. But that doesn't really help her for PvP, which is kind of what her kit is for. And on top of that, her tier 4 stats do get a decent upgrade with around 16,000 physical attack increase and a little over 20,000 HP increase, but her HP base stat is still kind of low. The strikers that you should use for Elektra are ones that match her instinct type, which is Justice, and thankfully for her, Justice instinct characters are good both in PvE and PvP. Those would be Ghost Rider and Black Widow, but if you've already used those characters with other characters tier 4s, then just use a character that has a striker skill that has a damage increase on it. Usually those are the best to go with, even if you don't have access to ones that have iframe ignore on that same skill. The tier 4 skill definitely does make her better in PvE. You can see that the same stage at tier 4 I'm able to complete about 2 minutes and 10 seconds faster, which is above the curve in terms of the tier 4 upgrade, since most characters usually get about anywhere from 1 minute and 30 seconds to almost 2 minute upgrade, but for her it was a little bit more than that. So you can see that it definitely does improve her PvE capability and potentially allow her to function in PvE, but she is competing against some really heavy hitters like Luna, so that's why I recommended not necessarily building her for that, but PvP instead. For people that were hoping Elektra would be the free-to-play stand-in for Luna in ABX and ABL for the speed female days, you're not really in luck because the character just doesn't really have a high enough hit count, and there are better options. So she isn't really a stand-in. You have better options, and you really shouldn't consider building her for things like ABX and ABL. As you can see here, at level 80, I was only able to score close to 9 million, and I had access to basically 2 supports, one of them being a leadership. Even at tier 4, her score does improve. I was able to hit a little bit over 11 million with her, but still, that's not much for a character that is at tier 4, and again has 2 supports and a leadership. If she has a high enough hit count, I should easily be able to hit around 13 million or a little bit more, even without having a damage proc. Her performance in PvP is much more justified and is why I would recommend building her for that. You can see that in my first tests with her, I was only level 70. I had only an obelisk with 4 seconds invincibility, and I was able to take out at least 1 life of sentry. In the second test that I did, I was also able to take out at least 1 life of a tier 4 silver surfer, and again this was just with an obelisk. I usually find that this is a good baseline if the character can do something even at level 70, but it's not always the case. Sometimes they have to be kind of max build or tier 4. Regardless, the character does have some potential in PvP, though it is kind of conflicted by some not so great design choices. Just as a heads up, the main CTP that I tested on Elektra was a mighty CTP of Conquest, though I do have some insights on other CTPs that can work for her and could potentially even be better than the Conquest, but I ultimately went with Conquest for specific reasons, which I'll mention soon enough. You'll notice throughout this testing that Elektra is capable of taking out some of the top meta characters, potentially even 2 of their lives, but you'll also see in some clips that she just ends up continuously going through multiple skills trying to damage them, or potentially just dying instantly because of her major flaw in her kit. I'm not sure if this was an issue with the previous uniform. I'm assuming that it was, and the devs didn't really address it or change it in any way, but the major flaw with her kit is that the second skill, the counter iframe skill, doesn't really get the full benefits just from activation. It has different effects based on whether the skill activates the counter or doesn't activate it, and unfortunately for Elektra, the most beneficial part of the second skill is kind of hidden behind the actual counter portion. This is one of the reasons why she takes so long in fights, and you'll see that in some instances she'll one-shot an opponent, and in other ones like this clip, she'll just get one-shotted instantly. The second skill lists that Elektra gets damage immunity, removal of debuffs, she gets 70% penetration to all sources, and she gets the iframe ignore effect, which means that she can basically iframe ignore across any of her skills as long as that buff is up. However, only a portion of these effects are up when Elektra uses the skill. When she doesn't counter, she has access to the debuff removal and the damage immunity, but she only gains the penetration effect and the iframe ignore effect when the counter actually triggers. So that really is a major problem for the character because she effectively doesn't have any kind of penetration unless the counter hits. And counters in the current meta and currently in PvP are not really reliable because there's so many characters now that have super guard break and can just knock her out of that skill so she doesn't gain penetration. This is one of the reasons that she just takes forever to fight versus opponents, because she doesn't have penetration when she's going into her other skills. So she just can't get through to their health bar, and oftentimes will just end up dying because she will not really be able to do anything with her tier 4 skill, whereas the opponent can iframe ignore her, penetrate her, and also have access to better tier 4 skills. The other issue that I mentioned is that the character kind of has slow skills, where the opponent can basically go back into their iframe ignore skill before she even gets through one of her skills, like the 5th skill, for example. This makes her very effective versus mid-level characters who don't have very quick iframe ignore skills or even iframe ignore skills at all. But for the higher meta characters, it's kind of an issue because they can basically just knock her out of that and just whittle away her health while she's struggling to do damage back. The other slight issue is with her sustain. Like I mentioned before, her base HP is still kind of low even at tier 4, and she needs to rotate through multiple skills to get the same level of healing that other characters would get through one skill or a passive. Her main source of healing is on the 5th skill, which is the 15%, but she never really goes into the 4th skill, which has the other 15%, and her passive heal is only on a 33% chance of activating, giving her 9% healing, and that is on a 15-second cooldown, so she really has only the 15% heal on the 5th skill for the most part. This is really unfortunate because outside of the major flaw on her 2nd skill and some of the other factors I mentioned, the healing and the time to do damage, she actually has a pretty stacked up PvP kit for a character that doesn't have revive or immortality and isn't a native character. She also has invisibility that I didn't mention before, which also makes the character very hard to hit because she often goes into her 5th skill, like I mentioned, and that is a full iframe skill, and also gives her invincibility that she constantly activates. In terms of her CTP options, I went with a CTP of Conquest first. I was on the fence between that and a CTP of Authority, but I ultimately went with the CTP of Conquest first because she opens with the 2nd skill and immediately goes in the 5th skill. That gives her about 6 seconds of invincibility, and I thought that was a little bit redundant with the Authority. I kind of wanted more upfront survivability from the wall proc and the invincibility being up, so that's why I went with Conquest, and obviously also getting some additional healing from her sources, both the passive and the 5th skill being the active. I think a CTP of Authority isn't far off either and could potentially be better than the Conquest. I would have to test it out a little bit later when I get the kind of discount to try out different CTPs. But one of the reasons that a CTP of Authority could end up being better or just as good as a Conquest is because she has at least 33% damage reduction passively, so you can stack that up with a Steel Authority to gain closer to that pseudo immortality effect and try to keep her alive longer. The obvious other benefit that you get with Authority is that you get access to the damage accumulation, which I think she only has with her ultimate skill, but the trade-off with Conquest is that you basically have that with the top proc when you have a mighty version. Another option you can go with is a CTP of Regen. That's previously what I had on her because she has all those healing sources and because the penetration proc usually will activate because she's hiding invisibility and kind of filling up that top meter. But I opted for these other two CTPs first because I want the character to have super guard break immunity to be able to actually activate the counter skill and get penetration. And I would recommend the survivability CTPs over something like a destruction or a CTP of greed, since you can get the penetration effect if you stay alive long enough with those CTPs, and by going with a proc with either destruction or greed, the character is just going to be entirely glass and will often end up dying before you can even leverage the damage proc on her. Elektra is not really going to be used in timeline for the obvious reason that she doesn't have a revive or immortality, and that is kind of the opening requirements for a timeline team character unless they are a support. But if you want to know how to play her in timeline for whatever reason, you basically just want to spam the second skill every time it's available, hoping that the counter effect activates, and if it doesn't, then you immediately want to go into your fifth skill to gain that invincibility and hide in iframes. The third skill doesn't really provide you with much and needs to be delay cancel to do damage, so I would recommend going into the fourth skill outside of the second and fifth skill to gain that additional healing and barrier from it, and because the fourth skill can instantly be cancelled to give you a little bit more damage and also fill up your ultimate meter. Unfortunately, the ultimate and tier 4 won't be enough versus some characters, especially because they aren't really situated for PvP. In Alliance Conquest, the first few tests I did with Elektra was to take her into a solo team versus blast types that she had a type advantage versus, to see if she could easily take them out, but because of the reason that I mentioned before, the slow kind of animations versus meta characters that have quick iframe ignores on short cooldowns, she ends up struggling, and because they can knock her out of her counter iframe ignore skill, and she doesn't get the penetration, so she's just dancing around trying to hit the opponent while they can basically do the same in less time. That's the reason why she wasn't able to take out Adam Warlock in that first clip and take out Goblin Queen or Madeline Pryor in the second one. But the character still has value in PvP and is just inconsistent. That's her problem, but she can pull off some pretty amazing wins when she actually has that iframe ignore counter actually trigger and she gains those effects. This particular clip is the most telling of that. The character has the potential to go huge and get some massive wins. She was able to solo these entire two teams of meta characters and was even able to survive not only Rachel's revive kind of burst awaken skill, but also Quicksilver's instant kind of burst iframe ignore skill at the start there. However, I did want to reiterate that a lot of this is luck with the character and is really dependent on her actually getting that counter iframe ignore skill to trigger. That's why I actually did the exact same fight again. I was lucky enough where the team wasn't taken off the board, so I could do the same fight again with the exact same team and the exact same conditions, and the outcome this time around wasn't the same, because Quicksilver was able to knock her out of her iframe ignore counter skill at the start there, and she wasn't able to survive the initial burst the second time around. So here is another test that I did to show that the character definitely does have value in Alliance Conquest, despite the fact that she might not be consistent. She can potentially go big, and in this one I fight a Deadpool as well as a Madeline Pryor. So she is facing not only a character that she has a type advantage versus, but also one where she has a neutral advantage or no advantage. And it was actually quite surprising that she was able to take out Deadpool, especially because he has immortality and a pretty stacked up kit for PvP. But it does seem like you have to pair Elektra with another strong character because she can be taken out by awakening skills, like you saw one for Rachel and also one for Cersei. Overall, I would recommend Elektra for PvP players, for Alliance Conquest specifically. Outside of that, I don't really think she's going to have much value, even in things like Otherworld Battle. There are much better options now, so I don't think she's going to see much usage or any usage there at all. It's really unfortunate that the devs didn't put a little bit more effort into this uniform and her upgrades. They could have fixed some of the issues that she had previously, like allowing her to get penetration and the iframe ignore effect on her second skill regardless of the counter. She could have also had the artifact that she currently has be one for revive even, because the character is known for being revived and even has it in her kit or her skill kind of description. So they easily could have done that too if they wanted to, or just kind of fix the artifact to even provide her with guaranteed dodge. That would have been just as good an improvement over what she has currently, at least for PvP, which should have been her focus. Her tier 4 skill should have also been something with guaranteed dodge, similar to what some of the other spider characters have, or even Black Widow, just to make her harder to hit and allow her to survive a little bit longer, potentially even providing her a heal on the tier 4 activation. If the devs also paid attention to the character's AI for PvP, they easily could have also melded the heal from the 4th skill into the 5th skill and just made it a 30% heal instead of just 15 scattered across her skills. This would have made her much better for PvP and potentially just more viable in different modes like Otherworld Battle as well. You can tell the resources and development time on this were pretty limited, since even her name is misspelled on the character's item sheet, or where she has the Urus. It's spelled with a C, whereas the character is spelled with a K. So I don't know what's going on there. But yeah, if this uniform just had a little bit more time to cook and the kind of direction for what the character should be, which is PvP, obviously, then this would have been much better and probably could be recommended to more players, but for now it's just for Alliance Conquest. That sums up Elektra. It seems that this was just kind of a filler update and that the resources from the dev team is probably going into the anniversary update, so I'm excited to see what's coming up with that, and I'll definitely be making videos for whatever characters are going to get upgrades or uniforms, and I'll probably also end up doing a live stream for any kind of the events that are going on with CTPs and things like that. I'll probably mention when I'm going to be doing those streams in my social media things like Discord and probably X or Twitter or whatever. But yeah, make sure to stay tuned for that. As always, if you enjoyed this video, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. It helps my channel grow, and I can make more videos like this to entertain or help you out and potentially help out other people too. I always appreciate people taking the time to watch my videos, so thank you, but the video is now over.